Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about SEC Media Days. Not an explosive week in Atlanta by any means, not anything crazy, not too many shots taken or anything like that. In fact, we'll talk about something off the field that might have been the story of the SEC Media Days, had nothing to do with what was going on in Atlanta. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's talk about blue chip ratio here for a second because it has become a very important thing over the last about 15 years, really the last 20 years in college football. A lot of things going on, and the reality is, among transfer portal and NIL and all of this crazy stuff going on, high school recruiting still wins. At the end of the day, most national champions just find a way to get the best players out of high school and hold on to those guys. And the biggest example of this is the last couple of champions. You go all the way back really to 2011, and you will find that you got to be over 50% if you're going to find a way to win the national championship. If you do not have 50% of your guys, and blue chip players, just to give everyone an idea here, is 5 or high 4 stars. Just really, really the elite talent in every single year. However many of those guys are on your roster at that time is how you kind of calculate this. So as you see last year, Ohio State, 90% of those guys were the elite of the elite recruits. That was the best number of the last 15 years. As you can imagine, that roster was absolutely ridiculous, just littered with guys. Quinshon Judkins and Caleb Downs came in as former 5-star guys. So an incredible team they built up there, and another reason why they just had to win the national title. But then you go back a little bit. Michigan was only 54%. So there's 3 teams on this list. You have 2023 Michigan, you have 2013 FSU, and you have 2016 Clemson. Those teams are only a little bit above 50. So those are the teams that have been a little bit close to kind of breaking this trend, or at the very least played a team that was very close to breaking this trend. Washington was under this 50% model in 2023. TCU was under it in 2022 when they played Georgia. Now, they didn't come close to winning that game, but at the end of the day, it does show that the transfer portal is changing this a little bit because the transfer portal players don't factor into this. The reality is, if you go into the portal and you were a 3-star in high school, that's how you apply to the new team, as a 3-star on their, at least on their blue chip ratio ratings, which is a little bit unfair at times. You know, a guy like Trevor Pena finding his way to Penn State this upcoming year, that boosts their overall talent, but will not boost their blue chip ratio. So that's a little bit of the back and forth that we have going on right now with this, but it is a good moniker. It is a good idea for who can actually win a national championship in any given year. It's usually going to be the teams that are above 50% for sure on blue chip ratio, and the majority of the time it's going to be the teams above 60% on the blue chip ratio. And let's look at the teams that are above that 50% moniker going into this year. And it starts with Alabama. Alabama has dudes all over that team. It is absolutely ridiculous, the talent on that roster. Ohio State did not drop far after last year, only down to 89%. Also, all the teams with the little asterisk next to them, that's just the teams that I have picked. So Alabama is obviously one of them. Ohio State's obviously one of them. Georgia coming in at 84%. And then you got Texas A&M. And Texas A&M actually was not on my list of teams that I thought could win a national title. I feel a little bit up in the air about that right about now, and we'll talk about A&M on Friday, I assume. But at the end of the day, that's the number one team of you have the most talent, and I'm not picking you as one of the teams that can win the national title. I'm sure they'd love to prove me wrong, but I have enough questions about that A&M team. I think they're going to be a really good team. But at the end of the day, to win a national title, I just can't fully buy into that. Now, you still have some really great teams here. You have Oregon, Texas right under them at 78%. Obviously, both of them were on my list. LSU, Notre Dame right after that. And then you get to an Oklahoma team at 70%, was not on my list either. And I don't necessarily disagree with not putting them there. I do not think Oklahoma can win a national title. I do think they can be good enough to be a top 10 team. I think they play a remarkably hard schedule, which makes that a little bit more hairy, but at the end of the day, I think this Oklahoma team is very, very for real. Obviously has the talent to get it done. A lot of things have to come into play for them to finally get over that hump and even make the playoff, and then you got to win 4 more games to win a national title. So that's going to be a battle back and forth. Will definitely be interesting to watch what the Sooners can do, but the talent level is not the question over there. I can promise you that. Then you got Penn State at 68. You know, it's find their way up the last couple of years, but it's still a little bit below the elite teams in terms of a talent level overall. They got plenty of talent at Penn State. I'm not worried about that roster. It is one of the very best, maybe the very best roster in the entire country. but it definitely, from a recruiting standpoint, is not quite on par with some of the elite teams in the country. Miami found their way up this list very quickly. They are on my list of teams that could win a national title. I think if Carson Beck puts it together, that could be a really, really good football team that is able to do some real damage in a questionable conference in the ACC. I still very much like that conference, but I think when you look at those two teams that are on this list, Miami and Clemson, those are probably the teams setting the pace. And then you got some Louisville's, Georgia Tech, some really fun teams in there as well. Florida and Auburn, they were not on my list. I'm thinking about putting Florida on there. I got to be totally honest. I think that team has the top level talent to play with the elite teams in the country. I think cannot speak higher of DJ Lagway, and we'll get into my quarterback ratings actually on Friday as well. And we'll talk about DJ Lagway in that segment, of course. But then you got Michigan, USC, Clemson there at 55%, so not quite to that elite level. I mean, I think we saw that kind of play out against a Georgia team or a South Carolina or a Texas last year. You saw there was a little bit of a gap between the physical ability. Maybe not so much South Carolina, but definitely Georgia and definitely Texas. There was a gap between the talent level of those two teams, and this kind of bears that out. And then Tennessee and Florida State joining this group for the first time this year. Tennessee's been recruiting at a great level. No matter what Nico Iamaleava's dad would like to tell you, the talent is only getting better over there in Knoxville. And then Florida State, they're not going to win a national title. I feel very confident telling you that right now. They better be better than 2-10. I can promise you that. With that roster, you better be able to at least get to a bowl game. It's a good group of teams. I think I didn't have A&M or Oklahoma on my list of teams that could win a national title. I thought about putting Florida on there, but just couldn't pull the trigger there. And then Auburn has the talent. That's not a new thing around there. They absolutely have the talent to get it done, especially at the wide receiver position. I worry about Hugh Freeze. I'll just be totally honest. Michigan is always going to be in this group. Same thing with USC. And Florida State, I think, is going to stick around here now. If you fall off a cliff again for the second straight year and Mike Norvell's out the door, that could become sketchy times over there in Tallahassee in a hurry. But these are your teams. These are the teams that are above 50%, and there are some teams missing from this thing. There's no doubt about that. And there's a couple of teams that I wanted to highlight right here that possibly could win it all. Now, we'll start with Ole Miss because that feels like the safest one of these. The talent level is for real. There's no doubt about that. I love Austin Simmons. I think he is going to be one of the biggest stories of this college football season. I think Caden Lee's a guy that people don't realize how good that kid is, and they will this year. South Carolina is absolutely on this list as well. I cannot say enough good stuff about Lenora Sellers. I think he's going to be an incredible player. Have some big questions on the defensive side of the ball, losing some elite players like Kyle Kennard, like Demetrius Knight Jr. It's going to be tough to replace those guys. But I think when you have a quarterback of that caliber and especially that physical ability, I think you got a shot to do some special stuff. And then I did have Texas Tech and Arizona State on my list from a couple of weeks ago. I don't feel great about it. I'll be totally honest with you. I wanted to give the Big 12 some love in that segment. I can't imagine these teams win the national title. I think it would be an incredible story if a team from Lubbock did an incredible thing and found their way to the national title. Arizona State obviously building something very special under Kenny Dillingham and being able to parlay that into a title in the second big-time year there. That would be incredible. I just don't see the talent level like we were just talking about. Even Clemson to Georgia, Clemson to Texas was a pretty noticeable gap when you talk about the talent level, especially along the lines of scrimmage. Both these teams did a great job. Texas Tech did a fantastic job on the lines of scrimmage this offseason, but I just don't know if it meets that level. I'd love to believe that they can do it, and maybe I'll talk myself into it before the season starts, but those are the two teams that I'll put there with a question mark, at least for the time being. Really like what they've built, and maybe if it's a 2007 type year, they can find their way up there. But it's going to be really awesome to watch. There's no doubt about that. I think when you add transfers into this conversation, I think it gets a little bit more murky, right? You can add some really, really talented transfers that were 3 stars or even 2 stars coming out of high school that are hugely important players to a national championship team. It's almost happened in every national championship the last couple of years is a guy that's not overly talented or overly touted coming out of high school joins a team and is a huge part of their success in that national championship. That's obviously going to skew this a little bit. And maybe a team like Ole Miss that's not quite on that level but has brought in some elite talent from the portal, maybe they can find their way into that mix for this national title and break this streak. But I would bet it's going to be one of those teams that are above 50% in the blue chip ratio. I would bet it's going to be one of the teams above 60 unless Clemson can make it happen, which we'll get into. Definitely a team I'm looking at very closely, but if it's not Clemson, I think you're going to have to be above that 60% marker this year to get it done. But it's going to be really awesome to watch a number of different things that come from this. This is not the end all be all. Would love to see a 2007 type season where this is totally broken, but even in 2007, I bet you that LSU had enough guys to meet that 50% marker. But at the end of the day, going to be awesome to watch this unfold, and we'll see if it holds up this year. I tend to believe it will with all the teams up there, but we'll see. Definitely would be awesome to see that kind of fall apart and the chaos that would ensue. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we just got a little bit of a catch-up to do. We got Jake Retzloff committing to Tulane. We got Tony Petitti kind of falling on his sword for Michigan just a little bit. We got Texas versus Georgia on the recruiting trail and plenty of other stuff right after this, so stick with us.